Even though the Civil War began when Confederate troops attacked Fort Sumter on April 12, 1861, the war did not really begin until the Battle of Bull Run, which was fought in Virginia, close to Washington, D.C. Brigadier General Arvin McDowell was commander of the Union Army in Northern Virginia, and Confederate forces were commanded by Brigadier General P.G.T. Beauregard. The goal of this battle was to make quick work of the Confederate Army, open the way to Richmond, the Confederate capital, and end the war. On July 21, 1861, Union and Confederate armies clashed near Manassas Junction, Virginia, in the first major land battle of the American Civil War. Known as the First Battle of Bull Run or Manassas, the engagement began when about 35,000 Union troops marched from the federal capital in Washington, D.C. to strike a Confederate force of 20,000 along a small river known as Bull Run. The disadvantages for the success of the Confederate plan were several communication failures and general lack of coordination between units. McDowell's forces, on the other hand, were hampered by an overly complicated plan that required complex synchronization. Constant and repeated delays on the march and effective scouting by the Confederates gave his movements away. Fighting raged throughout the day as Confederate forces were driven back, despite impressive efforts by Colonel Thomas Jackson to hold important high ground at Henry House Hill, earning him the name Stonewall. After fighting on the defensive for most of the day, the rebels rallied and were able to break the Union right flank. The Federal retreat back to Washington, D.C. rapidly deteriorated as narrow bridges, overturned wagons, and heavy artillery fire added to the confusion. The Confederate victory gave the South a surge of confidence and shocked many in the North who realized the war would not be won as easily as they had hoped.
The Confederate victory of the First Battle of Lexington depended on the strategization of Generals McCulloch and Price. The South was twice the size of the original 13 colonies, so the Confederacy used size to their advantage. In this particular battle, the 15,000 State Guard members of the Confederacy were against the 3,500 Union soldiers. The soldiers all heavily depended on the telegraph and the railroad system for long-distance communication and for supplies and movement of the troops. The Confederate General Sterling Price had a wagon train that spanned 15 miles through Missouri and was heavily relied on for the Confederate victory in the Battle of Lexington. The Confederate soldiers stormed the Union trenches, however it was not a unanimous surrender by the Union. Mulligan recognized the hopeless situation and realized that it was going to be an unconditional surrender. The Confederate victory gained them $900,000, but there was no long-term benefits. Overall, the size advantage, the railroad, and also the need for secession in Missouri were used to help the Confederates win the battle. The Confederate generals Mulligan and Price really wanted more support for the Confederacy, however they only had the short-term monetary value of the war. The Confederacy could have improved their technique by adjusting with the advancement of weaponry, such as the howitzers. The new weapons were easily disassembled and moved along with the troops, but only 1 out of 150 bullets actually hit a target. The numbers and proximity to the railroad track caused the Confederate victory in the Battle of Lexington.
Through 1865, Civil War used a vast array of weapons to equip their troops. Most of the U.S. Army bases were located in the South, and most of these weapons made it into the hands of Confederate soldiers. A lot of the weapons were obsolete guns that were 50 to 100 years old. Due to the limited supply of weapons, many soldiers brought their own. Most of the older weapons either were captured or worn out by 1863. The Confederacy were without a large manufacturing base, so they had to resort to getting modern weapons from Western Europe. The main weapon that was found and brought from Europe was the Enfield pattern rifle. This weapon was 9.5 pounds and 55 inches long. This was not a light weapon, but it was reliable and very precise and accurate due to its rifle barrel. Firing a .577 caliber ball or a bullet from a 29-inch long .58 caliber barrel, it could make aim shots at up to 500 yards if it was a skilled marksman. The barrel was held to a wooden stock by 3 metal bands. This is the reason why this weapon is often referred to as a 3-band Enfield. Pistols and revolvers were not common in the South due to the use of shotguns by most cavalrymen. Pistols and revolvers were not common in the South due to the use of shotguns by most cavalrymen. Officers still carried a sidearm as a symbol of their rank. The most common revolver found in the Confederacy was an 1851 Colt Navy. It was referred to as the Navy not because it was used by the Navy, but because it had a nautical scene engraved onto the cylinder. It was a large sidearm at 14 inches overall and a 7.25-inch long barrel. It was a 6-shot revolver that was chambered for a .36 caliber bullet, and spare preloaded cylinders could be carried and swapped out in a few seconds for faster reloading. Part of the Confederates' downfall was lack of weapons and resources to go with them. This was a main reason that the Confederacy lost the war.
The Battle of Shiloh, also known as the Battle of Pittsburgh Landing, was a major battle in the Western theater of the American Civil War that was fought April 6th to the 7th of 1862 in southwestern Tennessee. 40,000 Confederate soldiers under the command of General Albert Sidney Johnston attacked Union soldiers who were grounded at Pittsburgh Landing, which is near the Tennessee River, on the morning of April 6, 1862. Confederates drove the unprepared Union forces from their camps. The Union soldiers were being led by Ulysses Grant at the time of the surprise attack. The Union was able to take a stand and mark a battle line at the Sunken Road, which is also known as the Hornet's Nest because of the relentless fighting that occurred in the area. Fighting continued that day until it was dark and the Union was able to hold up. General Johnston was mortally wounded that day, so General Beauregard took over the Confederate forces. By the morning of the next day, the Union had reinforced their army. The Union had 40,000 soldiers, while the Confederates had less than 30,000 soldiers. On April 7th, the Union was able to overpower the weakened Confederate forces. This 2-day battle resulted in 23,000 casualties. This battle played an important role in Union progress in the Western theater. The Union's tactic for this battle was to overpower the Confederates by having more soldiers and resources than the Confederates and using that advantage to win. General Ulysses Grant and his army tried multiple times to conquer the strategic Confederate river fortress of Vicksburg, Mississippi. Attempts by the Union to take over this location were stopped by Confederate counterforces in the rough terrain in that particular part of the Western theater. In late April 1863, Grant conducted a surprise landing below Vicksburg at Warrensburg, Mississippi. Grant's forces moved in rapidly. Grant's forces were pushed back by Joseph Johnston's forces that were stationed near Jackson. Grant's forces pulled through and continued on to Vicksburg. Confederate forces at Vicksburg were under the order of John Pemberton. The Union attacked the Confederate-held location on May 19th and the 22nd. The Union suffered great losses between both attacks, so they sieged the city to avoid further loss of life. The siege of the city lasted 47 days before Pemberton's forces surrendered. This battle was crucial to the Union strategy of capturing the Mississippi River to divide the South in half between the two forces. The Union's tactic for this battle was to surprise and overcome the Confederates.
The Colt Army Model 1860 is a muzzle-loaded, cap-and-ball, 44 caliber revolver used by the Union during the Civil War. It was used as a sidearm by cavalry, infantry, artillery troops, and naval forces. More than 200,000 were manufactured from 1860 through 1873. Colt's biggest customer was the United States government, with nearly 130,000 units purchased. The weapon was a single-action, 6-shot weapon accurate up to 75 to 100 yards. It had a 6-shot rotating cylinder and fired a .454-inch diameter round spherical lead ball. The Colt 44 caliber Army model was the most widely used revolver of the Civil War.
Now do is loaded, ready to be fired. As you can see, I'm just pushing these caps home just to make sure they're nicely fitted onto the nipples there.
The Remington revolver was a secondary supplemental issue firearm for the Union Army until the Colt factory fire of 1864. Due to the fire, the Colt 1860 Army model was not available for some time. Subsequently, large numbers of the Remington revolver were ordered by the United States government. The Remington is a single-action, 6-shot percussion revolver produced by E. Remington and Sons. It was nearly 50 cents more expensive than the Colt, but those who could afford the Remington praised it for its exceptional durability and its ability to quickly reload by switching to another pre-loaded cylinder. Remington percussion revolvers are very accurate and capable of considerable power with muzzle velocities in the range of 550 to 1200 feet per second.
Hey, Hickok 45 here. Now they make a little capper for this, a little tool. If I shot this gun more often, which is not likely to happen, I would have one of those. Again, look at my hands. If a little dirt bothers you, you don't want to get into this. Like I said, I really like these guns. I just don't like to shoot them. Really be in the mood. It seems that mood only strikes me about once every 2 or 3 years. Was considered, I think, the best of the cap and ball revolvers of the day. The cylinder came out pretty easily. It does seem solid. It feels more like a Colt single action in terms of the way it operates. And it's not a beautiful gun, I think, like the 1860 Army or the Colt, but it's not bad looking. And like Glock or any of the modern guns. Sometimes the beauty is in the function. If something works really well, it's beautiful, right? Okay, we're hot. We're ready to go. Make a couple of shots here. I'm not sure what I want to shoot. I might walk out and shoot one of those jugs. Let's see.
The Springfield Model 1861 was a mini-type rifled musket shoulder arm used by the United States Army and the Marine Corps during the American Civil War, commonly referred to as Springfield after its original place of production, Springfield, Massachusetts. It was the most widely used U.S. Army weapon during the Civil War, favored for its range, accuracy, and reliability. The barrel was 40 inches long, firing a .58 caliber mini ball, and the total weight was approximately 9 pounds. Springfield had an effective range of 200 to 300 yards and used percussion caps to fire. Over 1 million model 1861 rifles were produced.
like that. And